Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending AACP's webinar on laser beams versus diode cautery in oral soft tissue surgeries. Attendees are encouraged to submit questions using the Q&A box. Questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Before I introduce our speaker today, I wanted to briefly mention our upcoming annual clinical symposium in Lexington, Kentucky, August 6th through 7th. Registration is now open, and we look forward to seeing many of you in person. We also wanted to mention a special ad for all of our attendees today. With over 200 pages between 15 authors, the American Laser Study Club has a limited time offer of the Infant Laser Frenectomy Special Issue for free. Visit alsc.club/AACP to request your free copy. Our speaker today is Dr. Peter Vitruk. Dr. Peter Vitruk was born and raised in Ukraine and earned his PhD in physics from the Moscow Physics and Technology Institute. In the 1990s, he held a research scientist position with the Academy of Sciences in the former USSR, and then a Royal Society Visiting Research Fellow position at the Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, Scotland. He later worked as a senior scientist with CINRAD in Seattle, Washington, and then chief scientist with Luxar, ESC, Luminous in Seattle. In 2002, Dr. Vitruk founded Luxar Care, an exclusive certified Luxar laser service and accessories provider for 12,000 plus surgical Luxar laser installations around the globe. In 2005, he founded Ascalite and Light Scalpel, then founded the American Laser Study Club in 2017. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Peter Vitruk.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you AACP for allowing me and inviting me with this presentation on lasers, soft tissue lasers.
Hello and welcome to my presentation, Laser Beam Incision Coagulation Depth Controls versus Laser Diode Cautery Tips. In other words, we discuss how deep do we cut with laser beams versus hot tip diode cautery, and how deep do we coagulate on surgical margins with laser beams versus hot tip diode cautery. First, disclosures. I'm wearing two hats today. I founded American Laser Study Club in 2017, as well as a couple of laser companies going back to 2003. This is what I used to do for living, laser resonator technology development during my years in academia and industry, before starting these laser companies as early as 2003 and the American Laser Study Club in 2017. These are the two articles that form the foundation for the educational curriculum at the ALSC, and I base my presentation largely on the work that I published in those two articles. American Laser Study Club is the laser surgery dentistry safety educational platform, of course. For instance, we encourage you to take a look at the promotional rates for the laser safety online courses that you can take through the Laser Institute of America. We are very proud of our honorary members, including Dr. Kumar Patel, the creator and the inventor of the CO2 laser, going back to mid-1960s. Please also mark your calendars for the next year, 2022, the Study Club Symposium in beautiful Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada, during Valentine's Day weekend. Can't wait to see all the friends again in person, healthy and thriving. Let's define first the agenda for this presentation. We will very briefly look at the review of the ablative and non-ablative laser wavelengths based on the interaction with the biological tissues. So then we will dive into what defines the depth of the coagulation, or in other words, we will try to understand if we are frying the patient all the way to the bone when we are trying to cut the soft tissue. We will also look at the controls of the depth of the incision. In other words, we will try to understand if we are risking to cut all the way through the patient with all those magical laser beams. Lastly, we will look at what differentiates dental diodes from real laser beam ablative lasers. And of course, finally, we will summarize this discussion at the end of the presentation. And Now, let's briefly review the basic principles of the laser-tissue interaction, namely the absorption of the light by the soft tissue. This topic is extensively covered on our American Laser Study Club website, including a nice short video, and here's the link for those interested to pause and review the topic. In the interest of saving time, I will only very briefly review what differentiates the ablative lasers versus the non-ablative lasers. Where do we start? Absorption spectrum, of course. Here's the absorption spectrum for the histologically relevant concentrations of water and hemo and oxyhemoglobin in the oral soft tissue. These are the strongest absorbers of the light in the soft tissue in the wavelengths range of interest, roughly between 800 to 11,000 nanometers. And here's where all of the near-infrared diode laser wavelengths reside, around 1,000 nanometers. Here is where all of the CO2 laser wavelengths reside, around 10,000 nanometers. 1,000 times weaker absorption for diode wavelengths is the reason these wavelengths are non-ablative across all of the medical specialties and across all of the biological tissue types. These are a go-to wavelengths for many cosmetic laser applications that do not harm the soft tissue, but highly efficient at hair removal, for instance, and at tattoo removal. CO2 lasers are the ablative. These are the go-to laser wavelengths for vaporizing the histological water and the soft tissue, since the histological water is the dominant component in the soft tissue. Erbium lasers, great for vaporizing the tissue, soft tissue, but unacceptable for deep enough coagulation in the cutting and incisional applications due to the very shallow penetration of erbium laser wavelengths into the water-rich soft tissue. Diode laser wavelengths penetrate deep and coagulate deep into the soft tissue. The CO2 wavelengths, they penetrate deeper than the erbium but shallower than the diode wavelengths, and optimal for the sub 50 micrometer blood vessel diameters. Now, going forward, when we discuss the depth of cutting and depth of the coagulation with the laser beams, we will imply the ablative CO2 lasers and erbium lasers and not the non-ablative diode wavelengths for the reasons explained above. And now we are reviewing the depth of the coagulation and hemostasis on the surgical margins for the incisions performed with the ablative lasers, such as CO2 lasers or the erbium lasers. Consider the laser beam impacting the surface of the soft tissue from the left, as shown in this sketch. Ablation zone shown as the superficial subsurface area where the light intensity and fluence are the strongest. Immediately below the ablation zone, we have the coagulation zone. The light intensity and the fluence are naturally lower there, meaning that it is not sufficient for the ablation and vaporization, but still high enough to induce the thermal impact, such as photothermal coagulation. As we can see, the deeper the absorption depth, the more extensive and deeper the coagulation depth. We may ask, what is the optimum depth? Well, as long as we coagulate blood vessel capillaries, shown in this sketch, that's deep enough. Pretty obvious and extremely simple concept. So we can understand that's the strong absorption of the light in the tissue, meaning the very shallow depth of penetration of the light is not sufficient to generate deep enough coagulation. Very deep penetration into the tissue will be causing very extensive coagulation depth, which is an overkill. So there has to be an optimum depth of the penetration of the laser light into the tissue that is just enough, sufficient enough for the coagulating the smallest blood vessel capillaries. Incidentally, this sketch is showing the relatively short laser pulse dynamics, where the heat generated by the laser light in the irradiated tissue does not have enough time to escape into the deeper tissue. For the CO2 lasers, these are the so-called super pulse settings, and the time duration of reference is the thermal relaxation time. The concept of the thermal relaxation time as it applies to laser surgery can be traced all the way back to who else? Dr. Albert Einstein, of course. It is simply the time required for the heat to escape the irradiated tissue and to travel the distance approximately equal the absorption depth away from the irradiated zone and into the deeper tissues. And this is exactly what we are showing in our next sketch, indicating the direction of the heat escaping from the irradiated zone into the deeper tissue. And so this is the mechanism to provide the coagulation deep into the tissue where the laser light cannot penetrate that deep. This next chart summarizes the coagulation depth as a coagulation depth spectrum. We start with the short pulses in the range of the thermal relaxation time, or shorter for all of these wavelengths shown on a horizontal axis. Important benchmark here is this red shaded region indicating 20 to 40 micrometer diameters of the blood vessel capillaries. These are the data from published human cadaver studies. So, where do all the lasers apply on this chart? Erbium lasers, extremely insufficient depth of the coagulation. Diode lasers, very deep coagulation, and we already know that these wavelengths are not suited for the cutting, by the way. And now, the eureka moment, the CO2 lasers. The depth of the coagulation, as you can see, is sufficient enough, but still not excessive for coagulating the blood vessel capillary diameters, indicated with this red shaded area. And mind you, all this is still for the short pulses, or the so-called super pulsed CO2 lasers. For the longer pulses, the depth of the coagulation can be extended. And this will be also demonstrated in our next session of this presentation. So, to summarize, only the CO2 laser has the required deep enough and yet not excessive coagulation and hemostasis range, and it can be adjusted also by the pulse duration, as was explained earlier. Now, let's review the depth of the incision by the laser beams. And let's start with the simplest possible case of a single pulse ablation. We will need to have a working understanding of laser fluence. Here it is. Simple formula: power times pulse duration divided by the laser beam footprint area on the tissue, or the spot size to the power of 2 as presented. This is the exact formula for the ablation depth, and it is reduced to a very simple relationship between the depth of ablation and fluence for all practical incisional uses of the CO2 and erbium lasers when the laser beam is tightly focused and the laser power is relatively high, in excess of a couple of watts. Here is the direct proportionality between the fluence and the ablation depth is illustrated by this chart. These are my own measurements. Next one is for the erbium laser measurements. These data taken from the published literature. There is an extensive background on this topic in the literature. You can explore it more for those who are interested on our American Laser Study Club website. Now, this is the very practical expression for the single pulse ablation depth that we will be illustrating in the videos that are coming up. depth of ablation is proportional to the power of the laser beam times the duration of the pulse and divided by the spot size to the power of 2. The next series of slides and videos are all illustrating the relationship between the depth of the cut and the laser beam settings: power, pulse, duration, spot size. The methodology and the protocol I am using was developed by Dr. Robert Strauss for his live in-person wet labs. I just adapted it for my PowerPoint presentations. I refer to this protocol as Robert Strauss modified protocol. The key to it is in using polished cubes of transparent acrylic so that we can easily visualize the depth of the laser incisions. By the way, Dr. Strauss' presentation at our symposium is super highly recommended. Please check out the listings. Here's Dr. Strauss himself with Dr. Patel and myself at our inaugural symposium back in 2018, 3 years ago. What you will not see in my videos is the surgical laser plume evacuator, but super highly important laser safety feature to be in compliance with the ANSI standard for safe use of lasers. Please always remember to use it in your surgeries. So the first, let's look how the laser power impacts the depth of a single pulse ablation. So here's the formula. So we expect the direct proportionality between power and the depth of the ablation. And so here's the video. Let's watch it. That's for the 3 watts, half a second long pulse, 1/4 millimeter spot size. You saw live how the incision was happening. Now let's double the power, and our expectation is the depth should be double, and that's exactly what we see. Further increasing the laser power, and we see the depth being proportional to the increased laser power. So now, next, let's try to adjust the depth of the incision without adjusting the laser power. And our tool for the adjustment of the depth will be just the pulse duration. So here's the formula. It's illustrating the direct proportionality between the duration of the pulse and the depth of the incision. So here's the first video. Long pulse, 9 watts, 1/4 millimeter spot size. Now let's reduce the duration of the pulse. And what do we see? We see shallower incision. Let's decrease the pulse even further. Even shorter incision, and just for the heck of it, another duration of the pulse, and very short incision depth proportional to the very short duration of the pulse. So far, so good. Great illustration. You just saw all of this with your own eyes. Now, let's ratchet the complexity of our tests. Let's try to keep the depth of the incision constant while we adjust the spot size and pulse duration at the same time. So here's the formula again, explaining how the time and its spot size work together. And so here's the video for the largest spot size, 0.8 millimeter, very long pulse duration. And so here's the incision. So as you can see, there is a great deal of collateral damage laterally happening just because of the large spot size. So we are cutting with the dull knife. So let's select the twice smaller spot size diameter. The area is 4 times smaller, which means our pulse duration is approximately 4 times less than what we started with. So let's see the video, and same depth of incision, far less collateral damage laterally. Now, choosing the 1/4 millimeter spot size, the area is 10 times smaller than the originally for the 0.8 millimeter spot size. That's why our duration of the pulse is 10 times smaller than we originally started with. And let's see the incision, and beautiful incision. Super little, next to nothing as far as the collateral damage laterally. That's the settings that you want to be using for your incisions. that provides you with the sharp knife and very little collateral damage to the surrounding tissue in the lateral direction. And incidentally, 1/4 millimeter spot size is a default spot size diameter for light scalpel and wet scalpel laser handpieces. Next, just for the heck of it, let's look at the repeat pulses into the same location. And what do we see? We would expect nothing else but the depth of incision increasing with each consecutive pulse, of course. Now, let's ratchet up the complexity even more and make it the most practical relevant, the moving laser beam and the depth of the incision by the moving laser beam. Here's the same formula, except we are able now to translate the spot size and the time duration that the laser beam is firing into that spot as the hand speed of the moving handpiece. And so the next slide is really important to pay attention to, as it is one of the biggest take-home moments of this presentation. So let's take a look at the power. Laser power is set by the control panel of your laser, right? So next, the spot size. The spot size is set by the type of the handpiece you're using and a proper distance to the tissue, right? Now, hand speed. Who controls the hand speed? And the answer is you do. Your training now is reduced to practicing the hand speed. How much simpler the laser surgery can be if all that you are now need to be trained on is the steady hand speed. So a couple of the illustrations are coming up. In this video, we produced a shallow incision as shown. And next video produces a deep incision by simply slowing down the hand speed. How brilliantly simple is it? Comparing now the depths of two incisions against each other, we can really see that the physics really works. Twice as slow hand speed produced twice as deep incision. Just another way to look at all these interdependencies. The depth of the incision is proportional to the laser power, inversely proportional to the spot size, and inversely proportional to the hand speed. So here's another video illustration. Slow and steady hand speed produces a nice hairline incision, approximately 250 micrometer in width. And the next incision, super shallow, just because of the very fast hand speed. So, what do you do to excel at your laser incisions? The answer is pretty simple. Practice steady hand speed, of course. Let's illustrate the depth of coagulation control during the laser beam incisions. This is achieved by using the pulses of different durations. The following videos will be using an extremes like CW settings and the superpulse settings mentioned earlier in my presentation. You can get more details on superpulse specifics from our website. Here's the link, and here are the couple of the screenshots that you may want to look for. So let's talk about the incisions produced by the same average power laser beams, but with the different pulse shapes, CW continuous wave or the super pulse, the burst of high peak short pulses that still produce the same average power. So the CW mode video, you can easily see the char on the margins of this incision. That's the lateral spread of the heat from the irradiated zone. Now, same power, average power, except delivered in a super pulse format. And now we see very little char discoloration on the margins of this incision. Now, let's try to ratchet up even further the complexity, and we will be using not only the super pulse versus the CW, but also different spot sizes, dull knife versus the sharp knife. So this first video shows the the dull knife in continuous wave, and we are attempting to do the full thickness incision for this tongue blade test tissue. So, high power but large spot size means the beam is not nicely focused, so it takes us multiple passes to cut through. We are on our third pass, now number 4, and we are not done yet. So now, same power but delivered in a super pulse format with the much tighter focused laser beam, 1/4 millimeter spot size. The power density is 10 times up. Let's see what's happening here. Beautiful incision, and a single pass gets the job done. So let's also now look at the similar comparison but with the different tissue. 1/4 millimeter spot size incision in super pulse mode. Now switching to the 0.8 millimeter spot size. Plenty discoloration. And now let's look at the close-up. Nice hairline incision with the 1/4 millimeter and spot size and the super pulse mode, and the not so nice incision below it. However, there are plenty good applications for both. For instance, treatment of leukoplakia would be a great application for the large spot size and a continuous wave. Another application for the large defocused beams is coagulation. So this next video will show the couple of the incisions at a 1/4 millimeter spot size. And now we will defocus the beam and we are coagulating. We are not incising, but it's a larger area coagulation. So, summary for this section: ablation cutting depth is proportional to the power, inversely proportional to the spot size, and inversely proportional to the hand speed. In our last session, we are looking at the diode hot tip cautery devices. These videos illustrate the obvious facts, obvious outside of dentistry, I must say, that near-infrared diode wavelengths are non-ablative. They are unable to produce incisions even at relatively high powers of 5 watts at both wavelengths shown. These wavelengths, however, are great at burning hemoglobin and oxyhemoglobin with massive thermal collateral damage, however, as you can see in these videos. So, how exactly the commercial near-infrared diodes cut the soft tissue? The answer is hot tips, of course. Hot means all the way in excess of 1,000 degrees Celsius, often not controlled by the user. And here's the nice and blunt description of how laser diodes operate in
What's your
dentistry.
views on lasers?
This particular orientation of diode is basically in the 800, 900 nanometer range, and it basically is light going through at that wavelength through a fiber optic bundle, and the light will do nothing until you put, as you know, a black piece of burnt cork or articulating color on the tip. So if you send light through this fiber optic bundle and it's this black thing, what would it turn to? Heat. The diode laser is basically a large electrosurgery, a slow, large electrosurgery, making a cut, give or take 3/4 of a millimeter to a millimeter wide.
So, much of the confusion for dentists about diodes originates through the massive misrepresentations and often falsifications propagated by countless educators. In this book, for instance, in both editions, Its fundamentals chapter, laser fundamentals chapter, fails to disclose that near-infrared diode wavelengths are non-ablative, and fails to disclose that these devices are hot-tip cautery devices, and also grossly misrepresents the optical properties of biological tissues, such the absorption spectra. Just like any contact devices, the depth of the diode incision is simply the insertion depth of the tip into the tissue. Coagulation depth, however, is greater than with the electrocautery due to the deep penetrating scattered near-infrared laser light. I refer to it as near-infrared halo. Here's the great visual and actual photo of what scattered near-infrared laser light massive halo looks like inside of the soft tissue sample here. And here's the video of what hot tip diode cautery looks like. First, charring the glass tip. Pretty bizarre if you ask me for a sterile medical device, right? Now, watch the widespread, massive near-infrared halo inside of the tissue. Why do you think all the white, seared, cooked tissue we see there? Yep, widespread thermal damage, a burn if you ask me, hard to watch knowing what's happening there. And it goes on for minutes. And just as a reference point as to what the proper laser frenectomy surgery should look like, with the proper ablative laser, fast, with just enough coagulation, no bleeding, and zero collateral damage, done in under 3 seconds. So, as was detailed earlier, when working with ablative laser beam lasers, you, as the operator, must excel an ace at a steady hand speed. Pretty simple task to train a new laser beam laser user on. However, not so fast with the diodes. Here are at least 5 super highly important aspects of user training that nobody really talks about in the textbooks, for instance, all listed here in no particular order, since all of them are super important for the sake of patient safety. And now the summary for 1000, 3000, and 10,000 nanometer class lasers. Near-infrared diodes, non-ablative hot-tip cautery devices with incision and coagulation depths listed as follows. Erbium lasers, great ablative cutting devices but with poor coagulation depths, insufficient for high-speed soft tissue surgeries. CO2 lasers, not your best cutters and not your best coagulators, but you get both at the same time. Coagulation depth is just enough for sealing blood vessel capillaries, and the incision depth is proportional to power and inversely proportional to the spot size and hand speed.
And that was pretty much the pretty short half-hour summary of the wavelength and pulsing impact both the depth of the coagulation hemostasis and also the depth of the incision. Also encourage and welcome everyone to take a look at the American Laser Study Club website, where this material provides more details. Kind of devil is often in the details if you want to learn more. That's all for me.
Thank you, Peter, for that great presentation.
Thank you, ACP.